Dragon's Dogma 2 has a lot of unique mechanics. I'm going to be taking a look at them to see which ones they did right and which ones don't quite land. I'm not going to be taking into account any controversy surrounding the game, nor am I going to be rating the game as a whole. I'm just going to be talking about specific mechanics. And after 55 hours of gameplay, there are 6 mechanics I want to dive into. I think my thoughts on one might be a hot take. Let's start with a contentious one. Limited fast travel. Most games limit fast travel to some extent. Some games you can only fast travel between specific fast travel points. Some games you have to pay something to fast travel, but in Dragon's Dogma, they combine several different limitations to make fast travel a huge hassle. You can only fast travel to specific points. There are only 2 of these points in the whole map, in addition to up to 10 portable points you can set up yourself. These portable fast travel points are hard to come by. After you set up all these points, you need to use an additional consumable item in order to fast travel. It can be found out in the world, or it can be bought for a non-insignificant amount of money. And finally, there's an option to travel by ox cart. This is a service where you can pay a small fee to be taken to another town. These carts can be attacked and destroyed during your ride, forcing you to walk the rest of the way. And it could be kind of a long walk. The choice to make fast travel as convenient as a trip to the DMV was announced well in advance to the release of the game, and honestly it sounded super annoying to me, but it's actually genius. The fast travel limitations increase the immersion. No matter how or where you fast travel, it makes sense narratively. NPCs can't fast travel because they need to set up the location and find a fairy stone. An average person in the world could choose to take an ox cart, and some people do, but the risk might not be worth it for them because there's no guarantee of safety.
It's dark enough to warrant the use of your lantern.
And the power of limited teleportation doesn't seem out of place in Dragon's Dogma 2. Like in Breath of the Wild, nothing in the game would make me think that seamless, limitless transportation should be possible even though there's magic in the world. And the additional cost of fast travel also helps me avoid my least favorite part of open world games. I don't know if this happens to you, but for me, inevitably I'll accumulate dozens of side quests and eventually break and then find myself spending hours just completing them all. This usually just involves me fast traveling from a town to a specific location, back to that town to find a stone or something to give to an NPC.
Not great.
I know this mechanic has been heavily debated, so let me know if you love it, hate it, meh it. And if you haven't played the game, let me know if it sounds interesting or if it sounds annoying. I would really be interested to hear what people think. So the implementation of the fast travel system worked for me, but doesn't that mean you end up walking everywhere? Isn't this game a huge open world? Dragon's Dogma 2 feels like it has a very open world, but the path you take is usually dictated by uncrossable boundaries. You can't swim and you can't climb, so it's easy for the developers to railroad you without you noticing. When you compare this to a typical open world, you have much less freedom. When you arrive to a location in Dragon's Dogma 2, you're probably arriving in the way the developers intended you to. This may be controversial to my fellow Americans out there, but in this case, less freedom is actually good. This approach to creating the world fixes the biggest flaw of games in this category. Open worlds suffer from one of 2 things. Because the devs don't have complete control of the player, they'll either flood the map with tons of markers, collectibles, and repetitive dungeons or outposts, making the game feel full and exciting in the beginning, but just cluttered and monotonous in the end. Or the alternative is to make very few deep hubs and try to draw the player there with different visual cues like a castle or a volcano or something like that, and then kind of leave the rest of the world barren. This approach misses some fundamental gamer psychology though. If my behavior is typical of a gamer, then places that look like there's nothing almost always draw me more than a big castle in the distance. Because what if there's a secret? But if you were to say the course that the developer intended, you might feel that the world feels deeper, even if it feels linear. By limiting the ability to explore the open world in clever ways, Dragon's Dogma has effectively set up situations that feel organic and exciting. So every trip out of the safety of a town feels like a tailored adventure without having to seek out a marker on a map. Real quick, if you're enjoying this breakdown, please like the video and subscribe if you want more video game mechanic breakdowns. Being out in the wild in this game leads to a lot of combat, and I think the combat system is unique in its own right. The combat in Dragon's Dogma 2 is comprised of several standard mechanics combined in a non-standard way. Mechanically, the combat is very simple. There's not a lot of stringing together combos, aiming, or strict timing to deal with. You have your basic attack, your special move, and up to 4 skills you can use in battle. Skills require stamina, and running out of stamina is bad. The final aspect of the combat is the ability to pick up, throw, and hold on to things, and that can be rocks, creatures, or even allies. Your attack, special, and skills change depending on which vocation you are, but for the most part, that's what combat's limited to. The combat is pretty simple, but is that good or bad? For For me, the combat's a little bland with 2 huge saving graces, which kind of puts it in the mid category. Because of its mechanical simplicity, the combat is super easy to master. Most vocations can't dodge or guard either, so that isn't really a part of the equation. This means for many basic encounters, you do the same thing. You use your most offensive skill as many times as you can until they die or until you need to stop to restore stamina. You can master the combat mechanics in a few hours of playing. But the positive aspects of combat balance it out a little bit. The hits in Dragon's Dogma 2 are chunky. Combat, despite its simplicity, has a great game feel. Also, what the combat lacks in mechanical complexity, it makes up for with positional complexity. What I mean by that is if every encounter took place on a flat plane, it would get boring really fast. But it doesn't. You'll find enemies near protruding rocks in the ruins of a house or even on the side of a cliff, and all of a sudden, fighting a harpy that can pick you up and drop you is a lot scarier when that drop can be off the side of a mountain. The right strategies in situations where you have a playground to hide or change elevation can turn the tide in what seems like an unwinnable battle. Positioning can even include jumping on the back of a larger monster, fighting and attacking its weak points. So I enjoy the positional strategy that's required, but I just wish the combat mechanics were a little bit deeper. I think that something that could help this would be giving the player more access to a few more skills. And in addition to that, making some of the more basic skills, some of the weaker skills, maybe not consume stamina. So stamina management would feel more like a carefully executed combo where one wrong button could leave you completely out of stamina. Or just taking the more traditional route of adding the parry and dodge mechanics. I had kind of a hard time thinking about how I felt about the combat in this game, so please let me know your opinion either way. I'd love to hear it. An interesting way that Dragon's Dogma 2 tries to spice up the combat though, is with the way that they manage the health. In most RPGs, if you have enough health potions, then no journey's actually that hard. As long as you can win the next battle, then you can just chug health potions till you're good as new. In Dragon's Dogma, you effectively have 2 health bars. You have your current health and your max health. The way this works is when you take damage, your current health goes down, but your max health also goes down by a tiny fraction as well. This means that after your battle, you can heal up, but not quite all the way. The only way to restore your max health to its former glory is to either rest at a camp or at an inn. This means the longer you go without rest, the weaker you will be when you go into your next fight. In my opinion, the health mechanic in Dragon's Dogma 2 is a stroke of genius to increase the tension on almost every journey that you take in the game. In regards to health, games typically try to increase the tension in one of 2 ways. Either they limit your access to healing, or they increase the amount of encounters that could kill you even at full health. Elden Ring is a perfect example of a game with limited resources. You get X amount of healing potions and mana potions. They don't cost you anything, but they can't be restored until you rest. This can bring tension to long journeys with easier enemies, but also short, intense boss battles. Any game you can think of where you can max out your health potion slot is the opposite. Think of Final Fantasy games where you could always stop at the shop and buy all the potions you need. But there are several foes that can one-hit KO your party. Both of those choices work well when they're balanced properly. But Dragon's Dogma gives you plenty of access to resources, and very few situations where if you enter the battle at full health, you're facing an imminent threat of death. In fact, you typically have a healer with you who has unlimited mana, so it's rare that you go into battle without your current maximum health. However, if you've gone a long time without camping or resting at an inn, you could find yourself avoiding even what's typically a super simple encounter. All of a sudden, even mundane encounters are exciting. This mechanic also raises the tension as your journey goes on, which is going to increase the likelihood that your journey will come to a narratively satisfying conclusion. The most epic moments will always be when the odds are stacked against you. And the further you go, the more stacked the odds get, making every adventure feel that much more satisfying. Because your party makeup is so important to your survivability in this game, the vocation system becomes one of the most important mechanics. Having classes in an RPG is pretty standard practice. The way they handle it usually falls on a spectrum between 2 things. One, either having a free-flowing class that kind of changes and evolves as the game goes on, or 2, having a more rigid system where after you choose your class, you're kind of locked into that playstyle for the rest of the game. We'll use Fable and Baldur's Gate 3 as examples. In Fable, you don't choose a class at all, but there are 3 clearly distinct options. You can either level up your physique, skill, or wisdom, which correspond to warrior, ranger, or mage respectively. But you're never locked into a class, so you can specialize as much or as little as you want. In games like Baldur's Gate, you choose a class that pretty much dictates your playing style. You can multi-class, but ultimately you have to play pretty rigidly within that class or classes that you've chosen. Dragon's Dogma 2 has a hybrid system, where you do have to choose a vocation and play in the style of that vocation, but switching vocations is part of the system. So while you're a mage, you can't shoot a bow, and while you're an archer, you can't cast spells. But you can always change your vocation in a town. Each vocation has its own levels and skills, and for the most part, you'll need to level them up individually. As you level them up, you'll gain something called augments that can be used regardless of your vocation. An example of an augment would be like a flat boost to defense or stamina, so it encourages you to level up all of your vocations. The last thing to note about vocations is how they affect your stats. When you gain a level, stats will be allocated based on your current vocation. So if you're a sorcerer, you're more likely to get magic, and if you're a warrior, you're more likely to get strength. It sounds complicated, but in practice, it's pretty simple. I really enjoyed the vocation system when I started the game. I was excited to try all the new vocations and I was having fun, but then when I actually sat down to write this video, I realized I don't like the vocation system at all. In my opinion, I just liked it because it's in a game that I like, but the mechanic actually makes the game worse for me. In terms of immersion and progression, I think that the vocation system is a miss. Narratively, it feels awkward to play several hours with a character who's a tanky fighter and who's leading the team, to all of a sudden change to a mage who hangs in the back and supports. In terms of progression, it feels bad to level up a vocation, start to feel powerful, only to switch vocations and become the weakest member of your party. The vocation-dependent stat upgrades seem like they would only matter to a power player who's trying to optimize a perfect class, but for the average player, I don't think it would matter much. There is a late game vocation that allows you to switch between a few vocations at will, and that's interesting, but it has its own limitations. I enjoy how different each vocation feels, but the biggest thing holding the mechanic back is the lack of depth. The max level for a character is 999, and the max level for a vocation is 9. And I'm pretty sure I maxed out my first vocation at level 22. I understand they wanted to encourage variety and they wanted you to play every vocation, but for me, mastery will always be more satisfying than variety. And a wide variety is not bad, but it shouldn't come at the expense of depth. I would rather have fewer vocations that I could develop throughout an entire playthrough. Would you rather become the greatest wizard to ever walk the earth, or the most well-rounded hero that's pretty good at everything? The vocation system does feel like a unique way to handle the class mechanic, but unique isn't always good, and I would like to see it go in one of two directions. They could loosen up the rigidity with which you switch between the vocations, so you don't actually have to go back to town to switch your vocations, you can just switch weapons, and I think that they should lean more into the stats being built up by your vocation. I think they could differentiate the stats a little bit more and have some stats that roll over to other vocations. So it would make sense that if you're a mage for the whole game that you wouldn't be able to shoot an arrow that well, but if you're swinging around a sword and shield, you should be able to then go swing around a great sword, for example. And there should be some shared skills. Like when I'm an archer I can slide, but why do I forget how to slide when I'm a warrior? Or you could go in the opposite direction. You could work on deepening the vocations, maybe by combining a few of them, and encourage mastery for the player over the entire playthrough. And this would also increase the replayability of the game. Am I off base? Is this actually a hot take, or do you have similar feelings for the vocation system? Either way, please let me know in the comments. Having an NPC companion is not unique to Dragon's Dogma. They can fight with you, they can banter, they can carry some of your stuff. In some cases, you can even romance them. Dragon's Dogma has the pawn system. You create one AI companion to accompany you on your journey. You can choose their appearance and their vocation, or even their inclination, like kind-hearted, calm, or simple, and that affects how the pawns act. Then you can recruit pawns that other people have created to join your party to fill out positions you need, like a healer, a tank, a DPS, or whatever. And unlike your main pawn, the recruited pawns don't actually continue to level up with you, so occasionally when you start to out-level them too much, you'll need to go change them out. You can't directly control your companions, but you can give them simple commands and they'll follow. Pawns are one of the most important mechanics in Dragon's Dogma 2, and for me, they take the game from good to great. The pawn system alone takes the place of multiple different mechanics in other RPGs. They fill the role of the NPC companion with top marks. They're actually helpful in combat. They don't just die at the beginning of battle. They fulfill the role that you recruit them for and follow your instructions. But they do more than that. The pawn system helps build a community around this game, which is otherwise entirely solitary. You can make a pawn and know that someone out there is going to use them, which incentivizes you to make them funny or powerful.
We meet again, Arisen.
Pawns feel like unique individuals because they bring their experience from playing with other players. So if you're in the middle of a forest that you've never been in, one of your pawns might have been in the forest before and can show you a cave you missed, or show you a chest they found with a different player. And because the game incentivizes you to stick with pawns around your level, they never feel overpowered, or like they know everything, or like they're holding your hand. But there is a method to recruit stronger pawns, which would let you actively manage the difficulty in a situation without changing the settings.
'Twill be a joy to serve one so gallant.
Pawns also play two vital roles when it comes to accomplishing missions as well. If you have a pawn that's done the mission with another player, they'll offer to lead you to where you need to go. This replaces the breadcrumb trail or the arrow above your head or just staring at the minimap like you do in so many other games. And this is a far superior alternative. When you focus on the breadcrumbs or the minimap, you inevitably get tunnel vision. But when you follow a character in the game, you're still focused on the environment and it feels like a more natural extension of the world. And also, if you accumulate multiple side quests, as one does, when you pass near the location that one of the side quests take place, then one of the pawns will speak up and remind you that you have something you could stop and do. For example, if you're following a quest that has you traveling a long distance and you pass by an area of interest for a side quest, one of your pawns will say so, and that'll allow you to keep your side quests manageable without ever having to actually go out of your way. Finally, and most importantly, you can give pawns high fives. If I missed a mechanic that you hate or love in Dragon's Dogma 2, please let me know down in the comments below. I love to discuss and break down video games, so I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to keep playing games till I find the perfect one. Peace, love.